my favorite topic, and when I talk to my family and friends, they tell me to stop talking about it so much. It's so nice to be in a room of people who actually are so passionate about the topic as well. I wanted to just talk to you a little bit at the beginning about the Canadian context. Thank you, because some of you have been to Canada and are a little bit familiar and others haven't. So just to give you a sense, Canada's boring. The news on, there's nothing in the newspapers. It's very, very unexciting. And all of our newspapers are reporting on what Meghan's makeup is going to be for the royal wedding, or Brexit, or what Trump tweeted most recently. And so I stopped even reading the newspaper. But last week I was extremely excited because there was a topic that interested me. So I think it was Monday that everybody was up in arms because there's a brain drain, and so all of our best talent, all of our top PhDs in STEM are going to the US, to Silicon Valley, and all the tech giants are recruiting them all, and this is terrible for Canada. And then the next day, he must be Irish or something, but there's a guy called Alex Usher who's writes, sort of the thought for the day in higher education, and he said, no, the methodology of that report is completely unfounded, and we have a brain gain in Canada, and all of these disgruntled Americans are coming to Canada because they feel more welcome, especially the foreign researchers. They're all coming in droves to work in artificial intelligence and all kinds of exciting things that are happening in Canada, and so, we shouldn't worry about it. It's a non-issue. So then I got my popcorn out, and I was all excited about, in the news, there's finally a debate. We don't have referendums about, controversial things like abortion. So this was, to me, this was exciting stuff. And so finally, in typical Canadian fashion, the Globe and Mail, that's our national newspaper, said, okay, calm down, everybody. Everybody's right. You're both right. There's brain drain, there's brain gain. We're kind of a revolving door of talent, so we've got good people coming into the country, we've got smart people going out, but it's good for Canada no matter what. Brain circulation is a positive thing, so don't get too rowdy about it, and, be polite and, get along, just like, Canadians do. So I thought a little bit about it, and I thought, is there anything wrong with being a revolving door of talent? How do I feel about that? And I think that it's not a bad thing, because as Connor was saying, we're graduating crazy numbers of PhD students in Canada, and we can't absorb them all. So in Canada, we are we like to think that we're entrepreneurial, so we're quite good at starting companies, and so there's lots of startups in Canada. There's a really good, entrepreneurship scene going on in Canada. But as soon as the good ones start to grow a little bit, they cash out, and there's a big American company that comes and buys them, and it probably happens in Ireland too, but so they get bought out, and this young 22-year-old won the lottery and, is a multimillionaire and maybe starts another startup. But if you have a lot of small and medium-sized companies in a country like Canada, they're not the type that's going to hire a lot of PhDs. And so we really, as the graph showed from the NSF, we can't absorb all of these graduate students. I worked at McGill for many years, and we had 10,000 graduate students at any one time. And so to get, them placed, that's not an easy task. And so I think that, having Canadian graduate students having experiences in the US and working at Google and Facebook and all of these great companies, and then coming back, they're going to be more employable, or maybe they'll, have a Canadian connection, or do business with Canada, or they'll set up a Canadian subsidiary. So, I'm pretty comfortable with, being a revolving door myself. So we have all these PhDs graduating and saying that we can't place them all, and then at the same time the Canadian companies are saying we have skill shortages. So as you might know, we're very strong in certain areas, and we have this government program called superclusters. So the Canadian government put $950 million into 5 clusters that they really want to create as hubs of excellence. And so one of them is artificial intelligence, there's advanced manufacturing, oceans research, protein, like agriculture, and then digital media. And so these companies that are in these superclusters are saying, we don't have enough talent, you're not graduating the right talent that we need, we're going to have to get foreign talent in, and universities, you're not doing a good job at, giving us what we need, and these graduates that you're producing don't have the skills that we're looking for. So do a better job. They're looking to the universities to modify their curriculum and to get more coders out the door. And then you go to the university and you say, well, why aren't you producing more, machine learning specialists, for example, or more PhDs in this particular sector? And then, for example, at McGill, where I'm most familiar because I spent a lot of time there, so the dean of science is from chemistry, and he's saying, well, if I, give all my money to hire, computer scientists, then what are my colleagues back in chemistry going to say that I'm, they can't hire for the next 3 years because, I'm giving everybody, new placements in computer science. So it's politically incorrect to really just, sort of turn on the taps based on what industry wants today and have just in time, sort of graduates that have the skills. And then at the same time, companies are saying, even if they have, certain skills in machine learning or whatever we're looking for today, but what about the soft skills? And as Connor said, somebody who spent their entire life in academia is not necessarily going to be the perfect person to give somebody professional development training in, sort of translating their research into an applied setting for things like, writing a business case or presentation skills, communication skills, those sorts of things. That's not their strength, their expertise. And so some universities in Canada have done an excellent job creating this type of curriculum that's in parallel to a research degree. And then others, still are trying to catch up and to figure out how do we address the needs of industry and make these students really, make it easier to transition to non-academic careers. And then there's a lot of biases. So as I think Connor sort of alluded to, a lot of faculty members are very traditional and they feel like, well, if my student doesn't go into academia, then I've failed them because of course they're going to go into academia, they're the best of the best. And well, I guess second choice, if they have to fall back on that, they can go into industry, but, they won't be like my poster, success story for, all of the graduate students that I supervise. And then industry, if you talk to industry about employing PhDs, I'm sure this is not just a Canadian phenomenon, they'll say, oh, I don't know, nobody has a PhD in my company, and, they're probably going to be expensive, and, they're very academic. I'm not sure if their skills are transferable to my setting. And so there's these biases. And so I think that, we're still working on it. The walls are starting to come down a little bit. But we still have a lot of work to do, at least in Canada, perhaps here as well, in terms of building bridges between those different groups. And that's where the Canadian government stepped in and looked to an organization such as mine and said, we see a need. We have a lot of small and medium-sized companies, and they're not spending a lot in R&D. And we'd like them to invest more heavily in R&D so that they can grow. So I think that for a small company to do more R&D, you can be more competitive, more innovative, and expand, and then be in a position to hire more people. So this is like a job creation type of an initiative in a way. And so we would like them to collaborate more closely with academia. And so that's where we come in. We're kind of like an eHarmony of, matchmaking researchers and companies. And I don't know if you have that here, but that's like a dating site. And so that's what we do, is we create a living bridge. And so we are mandated. We were just given $340 million from the federal. We've been around a while, so we started small, and we started to focus just on math and computer science and those types of disciplines, but now we cover all disciplines, including social sciences, humanities, the arts, to create collaborative research projects between companies and universities. And so it's really important that we talk about this collaborative research partnership, because to us that's really key, is that it becomes win-win. It's not I mean, we do internships, but it's not about the internship itself. It's about engaging both parties, coming from a position of trust, and really having long-term relationships between universities and companies. And so I think it takes a third-party, sort of neutral translator to play that role, who's not based in a university, who's not based in a company, but really can speak both languages. So I would say our secret sauce, and it's not so secret, you can borrow or poach it if you feel it's of use, is having business development people. So in our organization, we're about 200 people, but 60 of them, not including myself, are business development people. And so they have PhDs, they're recent graduates usually, from the university where they're housed. They're based at universities across the country. We represent every single university in Canada, so there's 93 in Canada. And so they're housed at universities, but they spend their whole day meeting with companies. So they might go to a cocktail party, or they might, just have a neighbor or bump into somebody and ask them, what do you do? And they don't talk about, I'm a PhD researcher and I work for Mitacs. Just tell me about your company. I'd like to get to know what you do better. And so the company, hopefully they'll have enough of a rapport with the person to really get at, what are your business needs? How can you stay competitive in your industry? That kind of thing. And then they sort of, hopefully the wheels are turning, when they're having the conversation, and then they say, well, have you ever thought of engaging with a university on that type of a project? And, maybe you could address it in this way or in that way. And, the business development people each have their own special, expertise, but then if they don't have an answer right away, they'll say, oh, I'm sure we could find somebody at a Canadian university that could actually work on that kind of a project with you. So they might shop around this particular opportunity that they came across, and across the country, they'll say, do you know anybody at any of your universities that's an expert in X? And I'll give you a good example that I gave at dinner last night, which just was an indication of how we kind of got started. So somebody bumped into somebody, who, I don't know, maybe they were, just at a social event together, and they said, oh, what do you do? And the person said, well, I own a roofing company. And so had you asked the person, oh, do you ever do any research? They would have laughed you out the door. And of course, we don't do research. But they said, well, what's your biggest challenge in the roofing industry? I don't know anything about roofing. Can you, kind of explain to me, what you do and what, keeps you up at night? And the person said, oh, well, my biggest challenge is that sometimes when I have like a really big job, like a complicated roof that has a lot of peaks and things like that on it, it takes me, sort of a couple of guys that have to get up on the roof, do all the measurements and everything, and it takes like several days sometimes to take these measurements. It's dangerous being up on the roof there, and sometimes we don't get the job, and so I can't have them making money because they're just doing these measurements. And so our business development person said, what about if we got like a mathematician in, for a couple weeks to sort of study what you do, how you take these measurements, and create an algorithm, to slow it down. And so then he was like, well, I'd be open to it, sure, sounds interesting. I'd be willing to explore it. I wouldn't invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars into creating an algorithm, but, if you can bring me a researcher that, thinks that this is an interesting problem to solve, why not? I'll try it. So the way that we do it is that we co-fund these internships. So we'll find a researcher who thinks this is an interesting problem to solve. And then, so we'll matchmake the researcher, and then the researcher will say, okay, I'm interested, I'm going to be involved, but I'll have a graduate student go back and forth between myself and the company to work out the problem. And so then we had a student go, they created an algorithm, and instead of 4 days to take the measurements, it took 20 minutes to create this report of what the measurements are for this roofing contract. So the company gained profit from having the student come in and look at the problem, and it was really great for the researcher to say, like, look at this practical application of mathematics, because people think mathematics, oh, that how could you actually apply mathematical skills in industry? So that's just one little example, but now that we've matured over 20 years, now we work with big Canadian companies and big, foreign multinationals, and we hope to, we like to think that we're kind of their trusted advisor, that now that they've been working with us for a couple of years, they kind of, open up and talk a little bit more about their business needs and what they're working on. And, obviously we have to be very confidential, because if their competition understands what they're working on, then, we get in big trouble. But once we get to know what their vision is for the future, we can create these multidisciplinary teams where you have, a student from the Faculty of Law and one from physics and one from, sociology, and, all working on this big problem. What are going to be the social impacts of this particular environmental change, or, all kinds of different ways of approaching a problem. And the companies who never would have thought that they could have any use for a graduate student are now coming around, after having had these little experiments and realizing, wow, I never really approached my issues in this different way, and this is fantastic. So we now work with about 6,700 companies across Canada. We do about 7,000 of these internships. And by 2020, we will be doing 10,000 internships. So we would really like to make it, quite formalized, that every, PhD student in Canada will have access to our program and be able to benefit from working within a company. But the key really is involving the faculty member in the project and getting them excited about it, so that it's not, you're going to slow down my students' time to completion. I don't want them to, and especially if they're getting paid from the professor's research grant. How does this benefit me? You have to get the professors who really are willing to work with industry and, would be excited to take some of the research that's sitting on the shelf over there and actually apply it to a real life setting. And so I think that is what's exciting for us, is uncovering these hidden gems. And with Orla, we were talking about, arts and social science projects, which is the most exciting, types of projects when you can come across them, when you can take somebody who's in linguistics who say, oh, Mitacs, that's really not for us, I'm in linguistics, and you put them with, machine learning, type of company, and they're doing, all sorts of crazy things with, linguistics in that particular setting, or taking, a student from literature and putting them with a video gaming company to do storyboarding, and, all kinds of different ways of taking all sorts of research and applying it in a setting that you might not have even thought of, until you really talk to the company and uncover what they're trying to do. So I think it's not only beneficial to, the researcher, to the company, they co-publish, but of course, having this type of an experience allows a PhD student to kind of test drive, what does it feel like to work in industry? They're not committed, they're not there for long term. They could stay as short as 4 to 6 months, or as long as 4 years with a company. But they test drive, is this company for me? Do I like working with industry? And they're not an employee of the company, which is another important part. They're really spending part of the time in the university, part in the company as an expert, going back and forth. So the company can't say, oh, I have a deadline today, forget what you're doing, we're working on this today. That's not part of the project, really. It's really part of their thesis, part of their core research, and it's going to benefit, their thesis work and really be part of their PhD program. And then the company also test drives the student. So the secondary benefit is that about a third of them get hired by the company, and so it's a much easier transition once the company has gotten to know you and really likes you. It's much easier than having to just, send a resume to apply for a job. I just wanted to give you another example. So quantum technologies are very big in Canada, and so we're really working very closely with a couple of smaller companies in quantum and all the quantum institutes across Canada. And there's a couple of companies that really started with 1 or 2 people, and they couldn't afford to hire PhDs, but of course you have to have really smart people. If you put somebody like me with a quantum computer, I'm not going to really, do much. But if you have somebody in physics or in engineering, that can really play around with it and really, experiment, wow, you could get like some really interesting ways of commercializing these quantum technologies, and these little companies that are heavily funded by investors who would like to see a return on investment at least in like 10 years, maybe 20 years, you know, when we can actually, you know, start effectively using quantum computing. You need to let these people loose on them and see what the commercial applications can be. So we're doing great things with these little companies who are saying like, oh, get me somebody in chemistry, you know, and let's try this out. And, you know, they'll do that kind of experimentation. And then they'll, you know, okay, and let's do this type of thing in photonics. And so all sorts of crazy, great, exciting things are coming out of these projects that you never would have expected, but because it's low risk to the company, they're only paying a small portion, and then the federal government, you know, through us, is paying the rest. You can have these, you know, fun experiments and take something that's on the side of your desk that you couldn't give to a full-time employee, and get this graduate student and this professor excited about it, and it could turn into a big project that's worth investing heavily in. And we've had a lot of successes like that over the years too. So in the future, we're really looking to you know, have specific targets and measurables. So we'd like to ensure that 50% of our internships are for female students. And I think that's important because if you look at a lot of the future careers, or these careers that are really growing in Canada, like quantum is very male-dominated, artificial intelligence very male-dominated. So it's really important to us that we're really cognizant of, you know, not just, you know, fueling male-dominated career paths for PhDs. We also want to target at least 20% of the projects to be in arts, humanities, social sciences, because even though those are harder to find, those are really important because, you know, arts graduates, it's not easy to transition, you know, into industry without this type of, you know, sort of a model. And make sure that we're not extending the times to completion. We're really reducing the times to completion. So you have to have the faculty members excited, on board, and make sure that the research that's being done is really going to benefit the thesis and really accelerate because they have access to equipment that they might not have had or data that they might not have had. So my job, just to give you a little segue, is to create international partnerships. And so I work with the governments of other countries to really see what can we do, because Canada is a relatively small country. We're spread out quite a bit, and so we need strategic partners, you know, in Europe, in Asia, in South America, to be successful. And so I think that it's really exciting to be here, to talking, you know, I've had a couple of visits across Europe while I've been here, and it's really exciting to talk about how we can create win-win collaborations for research mobility between Canada and other countries. And so we'd be very excited to partner with Irish universities, for example, you know, through some sort of an umbrella agreement, to have graduate students coming to Ireland to work in Irish universities on specific research topics, or Irish companies, and vice versa, to take your students. And we have lots of opportunities for them in Canadian companies, especially in areas where we don't have Canadian expertise that your university students might have. So that's pretty much, I'll wrap it up. We do have a lot of professional development training to go with our courses, our internships. So we do project management, communication skills, you know, all kinds of networking skills, to make sure that they feel supported and that they're not just thrown in the deep end. And I think that, you know, to wrap up, it's all of our responsibility, I think. You know, government, industry, academia, they all look to each other to say, well, can you do something about the problem? And, you know, what are we going to, but I think it's really a collective effort. I think to support the innovation ecosystem, it takes all of us to be those translators and really bring the communities together and break down those walls and ensure that we're strengthening the whole ecosystem, and not just in one country, but really internationally, to create this global innovation and brain circulation and become revolving doors in all of our countries, to encourage graduate students to really have these types of opportunities and become global citizens and solve global issues. Thank you.